First up, what is shamanic counseling? Shamanic counseling basically means that an individual, a shamanic practitioner, works with somebody in teaching them the basics of journeying. And then over the course of, say, 6 or 8 journeys, they go in and do their shamanic journeys particular to something in their life. They're trying to answer some question or whatever it might be. But then when they're done with this, they're taught the basics of how to journey and then can cultivate their own shamanic path beyond that. So that's briefly that. Now, what is shamanism? Shamanism, you could say, is the oldest spiritual tradition on earth. It predates religion, and it predates things like gods and goddesses even. It is the very fundamental way that the first of us started looking at something beyond that which we could just see in our normal everyday reality and trying to connect with the spirit world in some way or another. It exists in every indigenous tradition on the planet, if you go back far enough, regardless of what it eventually became. Whether it eventually a region that's dominated today with organized religion. Some still have more spiritual ways of looking at it that aren't organized, but most of the world is organized religion of some form. So this is not an assault on any of those beliefs. It's just a way of approaching it in this very fundamental way of connecting you with the spirit world or the other world, okay? We call this reality ordinary reality, what we're in right now, our everyday experience, our human conscious experience, right? And that includes what goes on in our subconscious. So it's not, when I say human conscious experience, I mean all of it that we have as human between the time we're born and the time we die in this human conscious experience as an ordinary reality. Non-ordinary reality, or as has been called in other traditions, such as in the Celtic, is called the other world. In some, it's just as basic as the spirit realm. And then like in the Aboriginal tradition, it was originally called the dream time. And it is basically a place that is near here, it is here, but on a sort of other dimension. And I don't want to get too far out in defining what dimensions are at this point, because I'm going to introduce them in a different way than might come up with a normal sort of spiritual way of looking at, going to various dimensions, however you might say that. So basically, shamanism is a way of connecting through our heart with our soul, that which is not our conscious experience, that part of us that existed prior to us having this humanness, this human physicality, right? And the part that is going to be around when we're gone. We call that our soul, or your spirit. In this instance, we refer to it specifically as your soul. And your soul leaves your body in shamanic journey, which we'll talk about how to shamanic journey in a later chapter, or later in this opening chapter. It departs us when we leave through our heart, because it's more connected to our body and these messages. It has more to do with intuition and these other things that are harder to explain than just the conscious experiences of experience. These are the sort of gut feelings, So it sort of gives us another way of having another voice in there. When we go into shamanic journey, when we leave ordinary reality and we go into non-ordinary reality, we visit with helping spirits that we'll talk about later. And then we bring that information back, and then when we come out of the journey, we then, look at that and write it down, jot it down, and see how we can incorporate that in our life. But what it does, it delivers it to us in an unfiltered voice that we heard in the way that we did. And whatever our understanding of it is can change over time. But it's a whole different way of looking at it and approaching things. And it can add a dimension, again, there's that word, it can add another path to your recovery trail. So next up, what is recovery?